I will never smell like bleach. I will never be the one cleaning. I will be the one being served.
Could hear the sweat beads forming on her forehead. Sandra stood there, her $400 red bottom heels clicking against the Italian marble, but for the first time in her life, those shoes felt like they were made of lead. She looked at the man sitting behind the mahogany desk. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a torn, grease-stained hoodie. His hand was wrapped in a dirty bandage. The same bandage she had watched him struggle to tie only 45 minutes ago on the sidewalk. I want to welcome you to Modernist Africa Folktale. We tell stories where the humble rise from the ashes and the proud are forced to learn the weight of their choices. If you believe that karma always finds its way home, then hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on your notifications, and if you have done that, Modernist Africa Folktale appreciate your support as a true folk. Now let's go back to the story. His eyes weren't angry. That was the worst part. They were calm. They were the eyes of a man who had seen the truth, and the truth had left a bitter taste in his mouth. Sandra's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her expensive perfume, the one she'd sprayed 5 times to smell like success, now felt like the scent of a funeral. She had spent 3 hours that morning perfecting her contour. She had rehearsed her answers about leadership and integrity 100 times in the mirror. But none of that mattered now. Because 45 minutes ago she had looked this same man in the eye while he lay bleeding on a Buckhead curb, and she had told him, "Don't get your blood on my coat. I have a real future to get to." Well, she had arrived at that future. And it was sitting in a chair she would never be allowed to touch. Now, before I reveal the moment Sandra's world officially ended, check that subscribe button. If you believe that how you treat the nobody on the street determines your place in the boardroom, hit that like button right now and turn on notifications. On this channel we tell the stories the world tries to hide, stories where the humble are lifted up and the proud are brought to their knees. We tell modernist Africa folktale and urban legends of payback that will stay with you long after the video ends. Sandra woke up in her high-rise apartment in Midtown Atlanta. She didn't look at the sunrise. She looked at her reflection. Sandra was 28, beautiful, and possessed a hunger that could consume a city. She grew up in a small house in East Point, the kind of house where the roof leaked every time it rained and the electricity was a luxury, not a guarantee. Her mother had cleaned houses in Buckhead for 30 years, coming home with swollen joints and the smell of other people's bleach in her skin. Sandra had made a promise to herself at 10 years old. I will never smell like bleach. I will never be the one cleaning. I will be the one being served. She had worked 3 jobs to put herself through Georgia Tech. She had clawed her way up the corporate ladder at 3 different marketing firms, leaving a trail of friends she had stepped over to get the next promotion. And today was the big one. An interview with Obasi Global. Obasi Global was more than a company. It was an empire. They owned the shipping lanes, the tech hubs, and the real estate that defined the New South. The CEO, David Obasi, was a ghost. No public photos. No Instagram. No flashy galas. Just a name that carried the weight of $4 billion. People said he was a man of the people. Sandra thought that was just a marketing trick. In her world, money meant power, and power meant you didn't have to look at the people. She put on her armor. A white power suit that cost 2 months' rent. A gold watch. A bag that screamed, "I belong here." She looked in the mirror and smiled. It was a sharp smile. A predator's smile. "Today," she whispered to her reflection, "you leave the girl from East Point behind forever." Meanwhile, 6 blocks away, a man named David was also getting ready. But he wasn't putting on a suit. David was in a small, cluttered garage in a neighborhood that most people drove through with their doors locked. He was working on an old 1988 Chevy Blazer. His hands were covered in oil. His face had a smudge of grease across the cheekbone. David was 35 years old. He was the CEO of Obasi Global, but if you saw him, you'd think he was the man you called when your sink was backed up. His father, a man from Enugu, Nigeria, had started the company with 1 truck and a heart full of faith. His father's last words were, "David, a man is only as tall as the people he stands for. Never let the height of your building make you forget the dirt it was built on." David ran a test every year for his top executives. He didn't care about their MBAs or their portfolios. He cared about their souls. Today was the final round of interviews for the chief marketing officer position. The salary was $500,000. David walked out of the garage. He intentionally let a heavy wrench slip, grazing his hand and arm. It was a shallow cut, but it bled. He didn't wash it. He wrapped it in a dirty, oily rag. He put on a faded gray hoodie with a hole in the elbow. He looked like a man who had had a very bad morning. He didn't take his Mercedes. He didn't call his driver, Siku. He walked toward the bus stop near the intersection where Sandra's Uber would be stuck in traffic. He wanted to see who would see him. The traffic on Peachtree Street was a nightmare. A construction crew had blocked 2 lanes. Sandra sat in the back of the black Uber, tapping her manicured nails on her leather bag. She was 10 minutes behind schedule. Her blood was boiling. "Can't you go any faster?" she snapped at the driver. "Ma'am, there's a man on the road," the driver said softly. Sandra looked out the window. There near the curb was a man in a gray hoodie. He was on his knees. He looked disoriented. His arm was bleeding, the red soaking through a dirty rag. He was trying to pick up a box of scattered tools, but his hand was shaking. People were walking past him, their heads down, their eyes fixed on their phones. He was invisible. He was a problem to be stepped around. The man looked up as the Uber crawled past. His eyes met Sandra's through the glass. He looked genuinely in pain. He mouthed the words, "Please, can you help me stand?" Sandra rolled down the window. The humid Atlanta air hit her face. "Move your trash out of the lane," she yelled. "Some of us have real jobs to get to. You're blocking the city." The man stayed on his knees. "I think I've twisted my ankle, ma'am. I just need a hand to the bench." Sandra looked at his grease-stained hoodie. She looked at the blood. She looked at her white suit. "Do I look like a social worker to you? That hoodie costs less than my coffee. If you're hurt, call an ambulance and stay out of the way of people who actually contribute to society. Don't you dare get your blood on this car." She rolled the window up with a sharp thud. "Drive," she told the Uber driver. "I'm going to be late for the most important meeting of my life because of a street rat." The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror. He didn't say a word. He just drove. David sat on the curb and watched the black car pull away. He didn't look angry. He took a small notebook out of his pocket. He didn't need to write down her name. He had already seen her face on the application. Sandra. He crossed her name out with a single heavy line. But he wasn't done. He wanted to give her exactly what she asked for, an interview. David stood up. His ankle wasn't twisted. He picked up his tools. He walked to a side alley where a silver Maybach was waiting. Siku, his driver, stepped out and opened the door. "Did anyone stop, sir?" Siku asked. 12 people walked by, David said, his voice cold and flat. 5 people cursed at me. And 1 woman told me I wasn't worth the fabric of her suit. "What are we doing now, sir?" "Now," David said, pulling off the gray hoodie to reveal a simple black t-shirt underneath. "We go to the office. I have a real job to attend to." Sandra arrived at the Obasi Global headquarters. The building was a spire of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the very clouds. She walked through the lobby like she already owned it. She was 15 minutes late, but she had a plan. She would blame the homeless man incident and turn it into a story about her commitment to getting to work despite obstacles. She was a master of spinning the truth. She stepped into the elevator. When she reached the 50th floor, the receptionist, a kind woman named Mary, smiled at her. "You must be Sandra. You're a bit late, but the CEO is still finishing up a project." Sandra sat on the leather sofa. She looked at the other candidate waiting. It was a man named Kofi. He was wearing a suit that was clearly old. The elbows were shiny from wear. He looked nervous. He was holding a small thermos of coffee and a folder that was slightly frayed at the edges. Sandra smirked. "This is my competition," she thought. "I've already won." "Nice suit," Sandra said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that from the early 90s collection?" Kofi looked up and smiled gently. "It was my father's. I'm just happy to be here. Mr. Obasi is known for looking at the person, not the clothes." Sandra laughed, a loud, cold sound that echoed in the quiet lobby. "Honey, this is Buckhead. Money is the only language people speak here. You look like you're interviewing to be the janitor. You should probably leave before you embarrass yourself." Just then a man walked through the side door. He was wearing a gray hoodie. He was carrying a trash can. He had a smudge of grease on his face. He looked down as he walked past Sandra, his shoulder brushing her arm. Ugh. Watch where you're going. Sandra hissed, jumping up and brushing her sleeve. First the street, now the office? Does this building not have any security? Why is this trash being allowed on the executive floor? The man in the hoodie stopped. He didn't look up. I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm just doing my job. Your job is to be invisible. Sandra snapped. Harry, why is this person touching people? I have a $500,000 interview. If he gets one spot of dirt on this suit, I'll have his job before I even sign my contract. Mary, the receptionist, didn't say a word. She just looked at her computer screen, her face turning a strange shade of pale. The man in the hoodie walked into the CEO's office and closed the door. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Sandra sat back down. The office was vast. Windows from floor to ceiling. But the man in the chair had his back turned. He was looking out at the city. Mr. Obasi, Sandra said, her voice like honey. It is such an honor. I've followed your career for years. Your commitment to excellence is exactly why I'm here. I believe in high standards. I believe that to be the best, you have to surround yourself with the best, and you have to have the courage to remove anything, or anyone, that gets in the way of progress. The chair began to rotate. Foley. Is that what you believe, Sandra? The voice. Sandra stood up, adjusted her blazer, put on her predator's smile and pushed open the heavy oak doors. Said. Sandra froze. The voice. It wasn't the deep, booming voice of a tycoon. It was the quiet, calm voice of the man from the curb. The chair finished its turn. There sat David Obasi. He hadn't changed. He still had the smudge of grease on his cheek. He still had the dirty, bloody rag wrapped around his hand. But he was sitting in the CEO's chair. And on the desk in front of him sat a white power suit jacket, the one she had been wearing in her mind. Sandra's mouth opened. No sound came out. Her knees, the ones she had kept so straight and proud, began to shake. You. She whispered. You were on the street. David leaned forward. He placed his greased hands on the mahogany desk. I was on the street, he said. And I was in the lobby. And I was the trash that touched your arm. He looked at her, and for the first time, Sandra tried to speak. Mr. Obasi, please. I was stressed. I was late. I didn't know it was you. David stopped. He walked around the desk until he was standing inches from her. That is the problem, Sandra. You only treat people with respect when you think they have something to give you. My father taught me that you don't find out who a person is by how they treat the CEO. You find out who they are by how they treat the man with the wrench. He turned to the door. Mary, send in Kofi. And please call security to escort this woman out. She's worried about getting blood on her suit. I wouldn't want the trash in this building to stain her any further. Sandra stood there as two large men in suits entered the room. Her armor had failed her. Her $400 shoes felt like they were sinking into the floor. As she was let out, she passed Kofi. David's voice softened. Kofi, I saw you share your thermos with the security guard downstairs while you thought no one was looking. Come in. Let's talk about your future. Sandra was marched through the lobby. Every employee was watching. The woman who had arrived like a queen was leaving like a ghost. But the story doesn't end with her being fired. Oh no. The payback for Sandra was just beginning. Because David Obasi has a very long memory, and in Atlanta, his word is law. Now you might think Sandra went home and learned her lesson. But some people, when they lose power, they don't get humble. They get desperate. And what Sandra did next to try and get revenge on David Obasi is something you will not believe. It involves a secret from David's past and a phone call that almost brought the entire empire down. Do you want to hear what happened when Sandra tried to strike back? Do you want to see how David turned her own greed against her in a way that left her with nothing but the clothes on her back? I will continue this story, but only if you want it. Type part 2 in the comments right now. If we get enough comments, I will release the next chapter of this legendary payback tomorrow. Don't forget to like this video. Every like helps us tell more stories of the humble rising and the proud falling. Stay tuned. The real storm is just starting.